Well, thank you for coming to our preservation panels. The second festival, second panel is going to be a very, very informal one, and I would like to call here our guests today. So they're going to have each of them is going to do a presentation that is related to what their specific work is, and then we'll open it to question. So Katie Trainor, manager of the collections for the Museum of Modern Art. Seth Berkowitz at digital restoration at Cineric, right? Yes. Okay. And Craig Johnson, who is the director of preservation for Warner Brothers Discovery. So I think Katie.
Okay, I'll start. First. Sure. Oh wait, there's previous slide. There we go. I have to apologize. This is a little old. There's a building missing. That's in that empty space there. There's the latest renovation. So I need to update this slide. Welcome. Thank you, Giulia, for having us. This has been a lovely time so far. I manage the film collection at the Museum of Modern Art, and it's great to be here. I like that we have an archive, a lab, and a studio represented, all three parts that make up film preservation to a certain extent. So at MoMA, I'm just going to just talk briefly about what we do, a little bit about the collection. It was started, the film collection, the archive, in 1939 and it was led by this lady, Iris Barry, who was brought over from England to collect film from around the world. She's the person that coined that film is an art form and convinced many others that it is. And for the higher ups at the museum to start a department of film and collect films. So we, it's often asked of me, why do you decide on the films that you preserve? And it's a combination of factors. We have what we call our preservation pipeline, and it consists of doing. It's mainly driven by exhibition. As many of you know, we have three theaters at the museum and daily exhibitions. So it's very exhibition driven. So we decide on what to preserve to exhibit it. We also have a film collection of over 35,000 titles. It's not the largest archive in the country, but it is the oldest. And so we have nitrate films and safety films, and we look at the conditions of those films, and if something's needs to be preserved, we'll preserve it. It's very dependent on funding. We have our own preservation funds, but we look for outside funding, the Film Foundation and private funding to preserve our films, and also by format. Like we look at, in speaking of format, nitrate films we want to preserve that might be decomposing or just in need to be seen after a very long time. So let me see, next slide. So like I said, we have 35,000 titles. We have, we also have special collections at the museum, ephemeral collections. We have a very large poster collection. We have over 1.5 million film stills. We have a circulating film library of 16 millimeter film that is kind of the beginning of the film collection, and it evolved into the permanent collection, but the 16 millimeter distribution library is mainly at this point where you can watch Warhol films and Richard Serra films for the most part. These are just some pictures. And some of the highlights from our collection, our gems are the Biograph collection, the D.W. Griffith collection. We have part of Martin Scorsese's collection. He splits between us and the George Eastman Museum. And we have, and people always say, how are things acquired and why do you have what you have? And I always say it's a reflection of the curators that have worked at the museum over the years and have acquired these films and have certain interests. One of our curators is in the audience, Dave Kerr. And so, for instance, we have a very strong early silent comedy collection, and that's largely due to a woman who was a curator there for a long time, Eileen Bowser. That was an interest of her. We collect a lot of early or avant-garde cinema and actively preserve certain filmmakers' films that their filmographies, like Ernie Geer, Ken Jacobs, Yvonne Rainer. We've done all the analog restoration and digital restoration on her films. I put in Clint Eastwood there. That's for Mary Lee Bandy, who was a longtime curator there. She was a big fan of his films, so we have his films. These are just some pictures. I'm kind of in the way, but this is our nitrate vault. This is our film collection is in Pennsylvania, 2.5 hours from the museum in Northeast Pennsylvania, about 20 miles east of Scranton. And that's our nitrate vault, and that's our safety vault over there, just 100 yards away. In a tiny, sleepy little town called Hamlin. And it was decided they decided on this area because there's a lab very close to this, about 15 minutes away, that the museum used quite a bit. That is it's kind of inactive now, but that was, and plus they could get a lot of land for cheap. So 33 acres. You couldn't build this in New Jersey or Long Island, probably not. And this is just a view of the vaults. This is our nitrate vault right above Seth's head. And this is a view of the interior of one of our safety vaults. And for those of you, I'm making the generalization that people know what safety and nitrate is, but just for those of you who aren't, safety nitrate film is all the film stock that any movie was made on up until the 1950s, the early 1950s. And then after that, they came, and it was combustible. And that's why a large part of our early silent film history is lost, because it was burned. It burnt in fires. And safety film was developed so that wouldn't happen anymore. So, and there's very specific storage conditions for storing nitrate film. So that's, the buildings have to be separated. They have to have fire suppression systems, even though nitrate can't be put out by fire or any chemical. It has to burn itself out. So, and kept at right temperatures and humidity. It's like our safety film. So all of our vaults are temperature controlled. And another, and this is actually, this slide over here is a shot of the Film Study Center collection, 16 millimeter, before 2 renovations ago, or I don't even know how many renovations ago. The study center, which is very active at the museum, all the films were on site, the 16 millimeter films, and researchers and scholars could come in and watch films at the museum. And then when they built this facility, they were all sent to Pennsylvania. This is our work area. These looks a little different now. I'll skip this part because this slide presentation is just a little bit old, but Warhol digitization, I was just going to touch on that. We hold all the Warhol films, originals, and the Warhol Museum owns the intellectual property. We work very closely with them, and we've embarked in the last few years on digitizing the Warhol collection. It's not quite finished yet. It's like, as you see, it's approximately 280 hours of film. And actually that petabytes has gotten larger. When you digitize film, it takes up a lot of digital space. So, and I'll let these guys talk about that a little bit more. So I'll just hand it off to Seth.
I think
Is it?
Yeah, it's Craig.
Craig, okay, here.
Thank you. Hello, good morning. Coming from rural Washington, I didn't want to drive truck like my dad, and I didn't want to work in a fruit warehouse. So the only thing is I loved watching movies and TV. So, I ended up taking a chance and, going to USC and see how they do that kind of stuff. And I don't think that that's much different regardless of your story. Are you poor? It's not a class thing. It's not a cultural thing. People love movies and television, and that's the core of preservation, is how do you make sure that that's around for future generations. So I've been very fortunate to kind of, go through the legacy with the library. I, was able to meet the head of, the MGM editorial. Harry Bush would sit with Sam Peckinpah, and I'd hear those stories. And although I was just working in the mailroom, I would go out there because those are the kind of people I liked. And it would be, hey, kid, what the F are you doing here? And then, hey, kid, rewind this. And so, I got to learn things that I didn't even know I was learning. And I think that that's an exciting part of dealing with the library that we have, to resource the people that have, been with these films for so long. And it's important to them that they exist, beyond this generation. And to be able to have those access, for people. It doesn't do any good if you can't see this stuff. And so in what we look at and what we're pursuing is a more collaborative approach. It's not one person's, likes this filmmaker or this type of film. It's inclusive. What I work with is everything from silent movies to movies shot, 8K currently, television shows, shorts, cartoons. You have documents that isn't directly things that I work with, but it's amazing to, scan the original continuity so what the footage and frame was so that you can track it and have that visible. You got to have, it needs to be transparent so people can resource that. That's creating a corporate asset that is, Warner's responsibility to make sure that allows for a better use. And we work with huge volumes. Consistently year after year, 120 plus features, 100 short subjects, thousands, 1,000 or so TV episodics. And it's important to have the approach and the process like second nature, because you don't want to hurt the material, right? You make a mistake and you clean a film that's already been lacquered and it dissolves the emulsion, you're gone. You don't have a second chance. So that's why it's important to make sure the process is in place. And much of what we do, we owe credit to the people that came before. There's a brilliant man from MGM, Roger Mayer, who before there was VHS, MGM had this huge library that, only a few films were being out in the theaters. Roger preserved the MGM library to safety film and in the 60s, and that was, against great resistance. I'm going to grab some water. Why save this? No one wants to see this short subject. And 10 years later or so in the 70s, the Eastman House fire destroyed much of the MGM library. So people wouldn't see most of Singing in the Rain. It was huge. What he did, and others, know him so much better, and we hope to have that, in more detail, have his legacy talked about. but I think it's important that we try to represent that now. How do you save original camera files that are on hard drives, right? And so there's so much to consider. My forte is more film, and my charge is to pick up on the data and the digital realm. This first slide is just an old slide because I like old stuff, and it is a Warner Brothers, which they pretty much stopped using in their logo. Certainly by 1929, it became Warner Bros. Although I don't think there's any legal reason for that. But that's not mine.
Oh my God, I forgot to add that. Sorry, sir. That's a frequent visitor out at our boss.
Okay.
Always have to mix the
So this is a Warner's was, famously, although it wasn't the first to synchronize sound, Don Juan was the first feature film in 1926 that had synchronized audio from beginning to end. There wasn't dialogue, but it was synchronized music and effects. And so that was a disc system, and these played inside to out. So you would have the stylus on the record on the inside, and the end of the reel was at the end. The reason that you could record 10 minutes, so that's how we ended up with the single reel system, is that was the capacity of audio you could record. And let me go to the projector. There should be a projector. There it is. This is a Vitaphone setup, and the projector, literally you see a belt running a turntable. And that's the process that we still can capture the discs if they exist, and it's a little more cumbersome than reading an optical track. But part of the issue that you have is that when you save, the bottom picture is the Vitaphone aperture, which is full aperture. There's no room for a soundtrack. So when someone goes to make a safety copy, if they put a soundtrack on it, you see it chops off the left side of the picture. And so sometimes you're compromised. You can't save the movie in the way it was intended to be seen because that copy doesn't survive. And you just hope to keep looking and find something that represents the original. This is a 3-strip, which I just like to see because this is pre-color film. So when you're talking Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, and there's 3 black and white elements that are exposed through filters, and through a dye process, they end up getting realistic color. And so that process isn't really done anymore. But in working with the library, this is the process that predated 3-strip, and it was 2-strip. And I had never seen this until a couple of years ago, physically myself. But in the camera, you would have red and green simultaneously images exposed. The bottom one is upside down, right? And so it's very rare for this type of film, relatively rare for this type of film to exist, because you can't do anything with it. You can't project it, you can't play it. The lab would have to make separate matrices in order to make a print. And so the lens from the camera shows you the 2 filters. And when it's combined, you see that you get a much more limited color range than what you had in the 3-strip process. So working with the antiquated systems, that's why you have to kind of approach, how can you preserve it? Today, we're lucky enough that, there's digital advances that allow us to scan that recombine it in the proper way without having to go generational losses. And so the internal vendor on the WB lot, MPI, does a phenomenal job. They have great engineers and people that are making patents all the time. We had a show that I couldn't protect on film because the complete feature only existed on an element that was 35 millimeter wide, but the perforations were 16 millimeter. And you had the image up and down both sides. And the labs used to print that all the time. And that's how Films Inc. would distribute it, on 16 millimeter. Well, it just wasn't possible. No one wanted to touch it. And a couple years later, because of advances in scanning 65 millimeter film, I was like, oh, how are you running that? And there's optical registry. And I'm like, well, then maybe you can do this thing that we were trying to do 2 years ago. Sure enough, after a few months of doing that, they ended up writing and getting a patent because they can scan and do that. So now, if anyone ever wants to restore Sunbonnet Sue, they can. But right now, no one wanted to. So when we're working with film, again, it's a slow process. You don't know what you're going to find in the can. This is just typical type of damage that we see nearly on every show. The little slivers you see in the bottom right there, those were timing notches, and those little notches were how that would tell the printer, the film printer, when to change the lights. But with use, if it snags, you can end up with damage like this. And in the nitrate world, you run into all kinds of varying degrees of deterioration. The emulsion's going away. Nitrate is an organic substance. It will go back to the earth. It will completely dissipate. It's not like the safety film, which is polyester, which has its own issues, but this is amazingly stable if it's kept well. We have titles that are 100 years old at MoMA, but we don't have our own nitrate vaults. But nitrate is completely stable and it's amazing. It just can also be very susceptible to decay. When I first started, I was out of school. I was going through the RKO collection to inspect and inventory the vaults and the conditions of their nitrate vault, which was on Cahuenga in Los Angeles. A skylight had broken, so there was water pooling on the bottom, not the condition to have nitrate film. The film cans rust and become airtight, and then they kind of looks like botulism. They start growing, and you essentially have a bomb because the gas can't escape. I didn't check that can. But so here's just a couple pictures. These are all available. These are things that we were actually working on. And you can see on the edge that there's decay significantly happening. They call that nitrate honey. You can take a razor blade and scrape it off. But if you touch it, it's a good thing. You'll get like an instant massive migraine. I don't know why, but it just happens. It's like if you touch battery acid, you can taste it in your mouth, right? But the picture was still, reasonable. Now, whether or not it will, the longevity is unknown, but that's why it's important, to expedite. Again, these are just different examples of varying degrees. That one's probably beyond use, but I think this is in the safety realm. They have their own issues of vinegar syndrome, where the this is a mag element, and they glue mag onto a blank piece of film, and that's how you record the audio, but they shrink at different rates. So it can buckle, and you start losing elasticity of the film. You capture it, warts and all. It might be muffled, have flutter. This is called spoking. You can see it looks like a wheel because the film is shrinking, and it no longer maintains its elasticity, and so it gets kind of crinkly and wrinkly. So that isn't so much to go over like all the difficulties that we come across, but it's important to note. I think we can probably turn that off for a moment. But it's important in that the approach is to understand what you're trying to accomplish, and that it's time sensitive, and not to cull because you're looking for something specific. The process is to be precise and methodical, and it's difficult to do when you're trying to do 100 features, but there's outside labs that we use that do an excellent job, and they go through frame by frame. An original negative, as example, might have a stock code of a 1940 feature might have a stock code from 1939. It lets you know it's in the era of the production. But if they did an optical, which causes a generational loss just because of the process of making that dissolve from one image to another, as example, that's dupe negative, and that's checked to verify, oh yes, that's also 1940. But what if it's safety film from 1957? You know it's not original, so you have to seek other elements. And that's where we rely on. We reach out to MoMA all the time, and it's the process is to get the next best element. And so we scan everything, and it's important. Daphne Dent's works intimately with the Film Foundation on wish lists for titles, and my boss Brad Collar is looking at the expanse of the environment of inclusion, and we have to work on how do we accomplish this goal, both internally and working with outside entities. So it's fascinating stuff. I love doing it. There's a lot of passionate people about that, and the key is if we don't do it now, it's just going to rot. And so it's crucial that since the Turner days, we've been able to have a corporate fund for preservation. And I think that's very important, because if you're market-driven, only the big pictures are going to be preserved. And last year we did 50 or so two-color Warner travelogues that have never seen the light of day because it's too expensive to do and it's not profitable. So having that preservation fund ensures that someone in the future will be able to see that content. And if we don't prejudge what that content is, then it ensures that you don't have a loss because of lack of interest in a particular subject or title. So I, you know, feel I've been kind of yammering on a bit, but I appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about the world of preservation that we're in, and the you know, there are amazing people at the studio. You know, I rely on someone named George Feltenstein because he is like the master of historical knowledge of the library. And so, you know, by opening up and, you know, resourcing the expertise that's available, you know, that's how we all accomplish the goal. And I think regardless of the, you know, the corporate asset needs to be protected. And how best do you do that? And that may include digital advances. You know, we don't know what is going to be possible in 5 years, but if we don't protect what we have, it's not going to be an option. So that's the edict, and that's really the main goal. So that's pretty much it for me. Thank you so much.
Hi. La, la, la. I'm Seth Berkowitz, Digital Restoration Supervisor at Cineric in New York, where I've been since 2004, where I started on the night shift, cleaning dirt out of Carousel, 20th Century Fox restoration. And I stuck around because I liked doing it, and I think because I was glutton for taking responsibility for things. So I'm a mere foot soldier in the restoration sphere of this whole equation. And what I've got for you is mostly a video demo. I'll talk a little bit over the first one. This is from Cavalcade, which is screening on Monday night. And we've got a little side-by-side on the left side. You're going to see what it looks like coming off the scanner. We did have the original negative on this, which is like, that's the ideal. But it's still got challenges, whether that's shortcut opticals or missing frames, tears, punctures, scratches, dirt. And then after that, a small restored excerpt of my favorite scene in the film, if that's okay, to whet your appetite, and hopefully you come back on Monday. All right, I'm going to stand for this. Get my laser pointer out. Right, so this is a liquid gate scan, so it's run through a solution that does take off some of the dirt and also can fill in various flaws in the element so that the light passes straight through it, and it actually can fill in scratches sometimes. Little bump here that gets evened out in the restored version. Yeah, we can try and match those transitions by matching the sizing, the brightness, contrast. You can see some just general sparkle, and every once in a while a rip right there. It's hard to look at two things at once, isn't it? I included this because when we are running the filters for dirt, if we choose to do that, it's looking for bright one frame aberrations, right? That's the clue that it's not supposed to be there. Well, what also is like that? Every single sparkle on her thing. So that's gotten easier over the years because now I can draw a shape around that and exclude her from the equation. This was missing 5 frames in the negative. We filled in it from another element. You're going to see it switch to something here, and we smoothed it out in the final. Right there. So we match the brightness and the contrast, and then I can use if we need that insert, I can use the surrounding frames of negative as a reference to kind of force the field and the look inward and smooth that out. Another shortcut optical here as we zoom in. Some bumps. What was the year on this one? I forget. 33, thank you. Rip there on the left. Even when the rips are dramatic, as long as they're brief, they're actually not that big of a deal. You can steal information from the surrounding frames or interpolate it if you need to. I included this because you see this on, first of all, it's a complicated sequence because there is flicker in it, but there's also explosions and crossfades that I don't want to mess with. So there's a lot of very light deflicker filters just over very specific sections. And also, I don't know if you can see these, often with these optical shots with sort of the composites, when there's multiple elements, they'll each have their own instability. And if you try and stabilize one, it'll just make the other one worse. So sometimes I just have to split the difference. This is a very long optical sequence. Tough stuff. You can see the shakiness, especially if you look on lower left. Light scratch there. Thankfully, not too many scratches by the time it got to me. When they're thin, they're easy to deal with, but it's always tricky when they go through faces. I find you want to fix the scratch, but not the highlight of their nose, you know?
I have a couple of questions myself. One is for Craig. Craig, we have 2 Warner Brothers restorations here in the program this year. It's The Wizard of Oz and Giant. And is there anything specific about those restorations that we should know of? How challenging they were and what went into the process?
It's part of the approach is to evaluate those. Both of those features had been done in around like 2009, 2010. So why redo them? And so you always revisit. Giant was because of an inquiry from Spielberg and the foundation, because of inherent issues that they wanted to know if we could make it better. So you evaluate the technologies. We started from scratch, re-inspecting the film, making sure that everything was documented. And by the way, that's now all visible in our system. Anyone at Warner Brothers can pull up that report and see the physical condition of the film. And then we did a test. And that revealed, like, yeah, some sections can be improved 10%, some 20, some 30. It's like, it's worth it. Let's do it. It doesn't hurt anything, and you get excitement from the ability to present it in a better way. On Wizard of Oz, it's the same thing. It's the recombined technologies. When I showed the little YCM frame, it was able, with less artifacts, to recombine those better 10 years later than it was originally. And so when we preserve Wizard of Oz, we preserve the three separate yellow, cyan, and magenta layers and the recombine, but we also allow that opportunity for someone to come in later because there's better technology. And so the challenges are the film is not getting better. Giant made use of opticals significantly, and that generation of film is more susceptible to fading. And as was showed in Seth's presentation, you get bumps that material, even though it's stored now in the most perfect conditions possible, Giant will continue to fade differently. The dupes will be more advancedly faded than the original. So it's the working with the people that are making the most of the tools available, and those advances make the screenings that the people will see today better than what they saw 10 years ago.
And to Seth, it's always strikes me how there is a judgment call that you always make when you are facing a frame and you have to fix it.
Yeah.
And how do you balance the choices? How do you not go overboard? And what is and I think Katie can also chime into this, because you can make a movie better, but does it need to be better or?
Right. First of all, do no harm, right? There's always, usually there's some reference that we can, if there is a question there, whether it's a print or a prior master that we can go to for clarification, and then always just the help, the guidance of whoever's producing, whether it's from a studio or from a archive or museum. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a real fine line you go over. And I think, for the films we do at MoMA, we're very conservative. We don't we try to keep a lot of the inherent filmness in the restorations.
Yeah. And just speaking to going over it, as far as there was when degrain kind of took off for a minute, and suddenly Blu-rays were waxy.
Explain degrain.
Just to lessen the appearance of the natural film grain, because sometimes it can be distracting, and there was a period probably around 2010 where I think it was over applied on a lot of Blu-rays, and there was a lot of, I guess, uncertainty on how to really apply it. That thankfully I think everyone's across the board, whether in museums or studios, has really backed off on it, and just if it's going to be addressed at all, only to even things out or just very minimal application.
Yeah, I call it the soap opera effect. Because there's been some restorations that people have gone way overboard, and it makes it look like TV, like soap opera. Soap operas have that. You can see around people, and they're too sharp and too clean and too steady, and so I think I like you want to keep some of the warmness and inherent nature of the film.
It is hard, it is different, kind of studio restoration sometimes from like a museum or an archive restoration. And I don't know why I feel compelled to say this, but sometimes the hardest note I've ever gotten over the years is only get the worst stuff. Because then you take it out, and then I always find then there's just the next layer of worse stuff right behind it, ready to be seen as the worst stuff. So in some ways, from where I'm sitting, it's way easier for them to say just clean it perfectly, because that's a clear target. leaving stuff is always difficult for my for my heart.
But it's interesting that you mentioned the soap opera effect, because our television, the new generation of TV, are now set. They have a setting that makes it, that cleans it automatically, and so you have to you have to know it, and you just get your TV. You get off
Ultra
that.
high definition.
Yeah, that ultra high stuff, and it just cleans it, and it just makes this everything more soapy. And it's good for, I guess it's good for sports and news. I don't know. Everybody looks a little too much. But to watch movies, you really want to take that setting off, and people don't know, so they just immediately absorb this information that is way too simplified and.
Yeah, I think that's why this festival is important and others like it, because it's introducing people to an era that. With the two-color examples, you aren't going to get yellow. It wasn't possible. So when people try to force something that the film doesn't want to be, you bastardize it. And so I think from we're simpatico with the museums in that you don't try to make it better. It's not your movie, and that's what I always am like. No, don't touch that. Don't do you aren't helping anything. You didn't, you want to maintain it. If you saw this movie in the best theater with the best projection setup day one, before any physical wear or deterioration, that would be the goal of what for me, I would want to see. Now, I'm not in the restoration realm anymore. We used to do Grand Prix, and it was market driven in that case. But in restoration, you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can take that hundreds of thousands of dollars and save 30 movies. I would rather see dirt and scratches and actually see it than only put out something that's restored. Now, you definitely want to restore the certain titles, and that needs to be an important part of the business. But you want to save as much as possible.
A story I like to tell is George Romero's Night of Living Dead, because we restored that at MoMA, and we're fortunate enough to work with George before he passed away on it. So he was very involved in the restoration, and specifically the sound, and Eric did the restoration of this. When we were doing the picture, there were moments where he wanted to take things out. There were like a moth that always bothered him that was flying across, or some little things that I call Easter eggs for his fans, because that film has quite a following. And so these Easter eggs, mistakes, the little mistakes that he was like, that always bothered him. And I said, well, I don't think we should do that. I mean, your fans will be very disappointed if you take these Easter eggs out. So we talked him out of it. So, but he did do with the sound. There was a moment in the movie where he said, "This is why I wanted this film restored," because he was able to finally match. Because he edited that film on an old moviola on film, and on 16 millimeter and 35, and he was finally able to match the gunshots to the actual camera of the guns exploding. So, when you work with a living filmmaker on that film, they can do whatever they want. It's their movie. But we were also able to say, hey, you might disappoint some people if you take that out.
It's interesting because for some filmmaker, with digital technology becomes like a creative tool. So they revisit their film and they actually change them. Billy Friedkin is famous for going into the films, and the French Connection. One of the various restoration they did, it kind of turned. It had this bright green, pea green, bright oranges that weren't in the film. It's a very muted film, and he sort of heightened all the colors. And I remember Sean Bellstone, it was a Fox that was working in him. Sean was like, no, Billy, I think we should tone them down, because people have a memory of this. It was like, no, because that's what they wanted. Just the stock didn't exist. And then after a couple of years, he was like, okay, let's bring it back. And so the lights. But, and even with cruising, he, it was really dark scene at night, and they contributed to the mystery of the film and the fear that the film instills, and he put too much light, and now you see what's happening. It's not as interesting. So it is like painting a little bit, and so I think some filmmakers, they really intervene. They use it to change the film or do stuff that they couldn't have done with the technology that they had at the time that they were filming. Does anybody have any question?
Thank you so much. But I saw the film last night about restoration, and I'm going to ask a very sort of basic question, which is kind of, we're obviously not seeing the original negative. In other words, it's not sitting in the projector in the back projecting it. So today, what are most times people seeing? Are they seeing a digital thing? Are they seeing, and how does that affect, as what you said, for example, the people who would have seen some of these movies on day one in the theater in the 30s or whatever, how different is that going to be automatically because it's in a different format?
Yeah, it's very much a digital world now. We no longer do full photochemical analog restoration unless a filmmaker wants that. And sadly, there's really just 2 labs left in the United States that can process film. So going out on film always now starts mainly with a digital intermediate process, and it's pretty much all digital exhibited. And now it's pretty much all you're seeing. Unless you come to MoMA or like some of the even film forum, and there's a handful of places in New York. We're lucky, but most, and in Los Angeles, and just random scattered throughout the country. But it's mainly digital that you're seeing, and it's for me, it's I noticed the difference because you're watching this constant projection, this beam of light, whereas with film, people failed to realize that there was this shutter blade that there's moments of blackness that your eyes get rest when film's projected. And so I physically feel different, in the movies when it's film versus digital, because it's like my eyes, you don't know it, but your eyes are resting a little during a 35 millimeter film projection. And nowadays it's just constant stream beam. You're not getting that rest. But that's just what it is now. It's pretty mainly digital.
We have few 35. We have a couple of them at the festival. One will be Bruce Goldstein presentation on Sunday. Actually, 2 Vitagraph shorts. Vitaphone, to Vitaphone shorts, like the disc that he did that was transferred to 35, and then tomorrow a screening of La Perla, Emilio Fernandez. So you can savor you can try the difference that Kate is talking about.
And there are a handful of filmmakers left that are making films on film. Like when you see The Fablemans, that was shot entirely on 35 millimeter film, and you can tell, even though it's been digitized for exhibition, and he digitized it to edit as well, but I could tell right away without waiting for the credits to see the Kodak logo. There's just a warmness, I think.
Yeah, and I think I was just saying that what Katie mentioned about the shutter is I started as a projectionist, and the 24 frames per second in conventional projection, you're seeing that frame flash, then you're seeing a flash of black, then you see that frame again, and in the second black, the sprocket pulls the film down and you see flash, flash, and it pulls down. In the silent era, you would just have a dial, and it would be, project me at 20 frames a second. So you instead of seeing it at 24, you see 48 frames, you would see 40, and your brain adjusts for it, and it feels natural. And so there's so many challenges in the digital world. We preserve digitally. We can't preserve on film anymore. And so those challenges are that's not a preservation medium. You just have to make sure the film, which I recommend everyone see, it's crucial. They mentioned the Showa Foundation, Warner's. That's where our digital copies go, because it's a secure site. There's alternate data backups, but that's what that's the foundation of preservation, is you have to be practical. And we couldn't do this work on film right now, but we can't just blindly trust that something's going to be written to a data tape and actually be recoverable. So it keeps you up at night.
There was a question here.
Yeah, Seth.
Yes.
I started off in a film and TV background, and we would start splicing film and ended up with Avid. But often the project was done in film and then transferred for the editing. But where do you find the workforce that knows how to do this, and how can you recruit people in the future?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of people coming out. Like I hear from a lot of people coming out of like Eastman House, looking for opportunities. So I've trained various young people over the years, and we also have a facility in Europe, in Portugal, where we had a couple of them over here with me for like 6 months, so that we could show them the ropes, and then they could go back. And, you know, it's sort of like a branching out of training.
Like projection, it's very much a mentor, like apprenticeship almost.
Yeah.
You can't go to school for that. No. You're taught by somebody.
It's all, I find the ones who succeed, or they just have a clear idea of what it should and could look like, and they're willing to experiment to get it there, and form their own relationship with the tools.
Right, you've been in the business about 16 years.
18, yeah.
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 So you're a kid, basically, probably compared to some of the
Yeah.
lab people that are still around.
Yeah.
There is a question there.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I'll start with the simplest one, which was that disc.
Vitaphone.
Yeah, the Vitaphone format that you said determined the 10-minute reel length. Was that a physical limitation of the disc, or did it have anything to do with what amount of time it would stay acceptably in sync?
It was both.
I always thought it was the other way around. I thought the 100-foot reel, which is 10 minutes, was standard before the Vitaphone, but Bruce might know more, knowing so much about Vitaphone. I thought it was film went.
Yeah, correct.
But I think it was determined by the reel length first.
Yeah, it was the reel length.
Because I was surprised when you said that.
Yeah.
The
disc was adapted to the reel length, right?
From the beginning, was it not, the 10-minute reel?
Yeah, the 10-minute reel it was.
Standardized by.
Yeah, and then later on it became or the 1,000-foot reel or 10-minute
and then that
reel.
was the dictated by projection, reel size, and but it happened to be that depending on what size of disc they made, that if you could have 12-inch, 14-inch, 16-inch Vitaphone discs, and so other than morphing the size of the disc, it happened to be that 16-inch would hold the 10-minute load, so it matched the mechanism. Mm-hmm. But that was a practical thing. It wasn't like you couldn't make a disc that would hold more, but that disc is spinning at a certain RPM on the middle, and it's spinning faster on the outside, or the other way around. Sorry, but
I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead.
About Vitaphone, I often wondered why Warner Brothers adopted the disc when there was sound on film technology already. When I first saw, I think MoMA's first Vitaphone restoration about 25, 30 years ago, I was astounded by the sound quality. Films made in 1926, vaudeville shorts, how great the fidelity was. It was developed by Western Electric, right? It was telephone technology. Incredible, whereas the sound on film at the time in the 20s was tinny or whatever,
Yeah.
correct?
Which is exactly the case. It was just that the disc sounded better than the movie tone process was. You would get camera noise and things like that. So, but yeah, and look, that was something that Warner's committed to. MGM didn't have religion about it. If they had a big picture, they would want to go out optically. They would use disc. They would get it in as many theaters as they could. So.
Just wait for the mic, because otherwise we
Wait for the
can't
mic? Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Giulia, and each of your stories are fascinating. And I just want to have one quick question for Katie, but a comment that I'd like to make, which I think is a great story about this business. You're all an incredible community, and as you said, there's a lab, there's filmmakers, studio. There's also the wonderful world of the collectors, which I've come to know, which I think is important. And I was doing research on a particular gentleman who eventually went to work for Carl Laemmle in 1929, but as a young man, he became fascinated with film, and Edison ran a contest, and I read in his journals that he entered a contest that Thomas Edison had mounted, and I did a lot of research, and eventually, because of visiting, I think, USC, I came across a Variety article about this Edison project, and there was the name of this gentleman saying he had won the contest, so it was first proof. Somehow it mentioned Biograph. Long story short, I called Paolo. He gets on the phone. Within 5 minutes, I'd been looking for proof for like 5 years. Within 5 minutes, he got on the phone. He said, I found the film. Call Katie Trainor. I called you. And the next day, you showed me the film.
Oh, that's right.
So I just want to tell you, these stories of discovery in this business are amazing. So thank you all for your stories.
And well, yeah, that's a whole other panel, collectors. That we've preserved a lot of films because collectors have saved them.
Thank you, Sam. So last night we had the great pleasure to see a restored version of The Runner, and it looks to me like we have the director in the house, Amir. So it would be great to hear what process took place. That was shot, I believe, in 1982, 1983, and it looked phenomenal. It sounded great. It was a powerful film. Could we hear a little bit about the specific way that was restored?
wait for the mic.
Thank you. Actually, you guys talking, I'm thinking about this last night. How I enjoyed, to discover my film again and the great screen and, sound, and seemed like I did it yesterday, holding this film. And restoration, saved so many films from the past. But I'm one of them lucky. My film is here, and I'm here now. I can see it, not part of the memory from back. But it's the very important to how can make sound also is better. To not just which is I'm lucky. They did a very good job, and Cineric, the great people there, and without that, without restoration, I think is so many films get lost. Actually, this gentleman mentioned it. $1,000, $100,000 we can spend it on film. I prefer half and half. Make a movie and save the film from past. If not, cinema would not exist anymore. Anyway, last night very enjoyable for me. Seemed like a born again. Seemed like, I did a new film, which is now 39 years ago or something. And I'm very lucky this moment. Thank you. Cut.
I have a general question. Given the fact that the major studios now have all been absorbed into giant corporations, of which not one of them is movie making their core business, like Columbia Pictures is part of Sony, which is a consumer electronics giant. Universal Pictures is part of Comcast, which is a cable TV and broadcast network giant. Even Warner Brothers now being part of Discovery. Luckily, its CEO seems to have a very emotional tie to the legacy of Hollywood. But are you concerned about the future of film preservation, and what role can the Library of Congress as the as the greatest keeper. Not that they need physical custody, but maybe as a cataloger of where everything is. I remember a couple of years ago, I saw a film at Telluride called The Fall of Berlin, which was a 3-hour propaganda movie, pretty much executive produced by Joseph Stalin, using the entire military to show his version of the end of World War II. I mean, there's all these gems, and I just wonder, like, in projecting into the future, you know, how are we going to ensure that we know where things are, that whether there's physical custody or not, that there's some, you know, database where researchers can find not only the big Hollywood musicals or films from the 1920s, but some of these more, you know, obscure but very, very important. You know, like there was a mention in the film yesterday about all the Olympic Games, which I think I never knew about that. I think that would be fascinating. So I don't know who wants to take that, but that's one of the concerns I know that I have.
Is your question where you can find things and there's never going to be a universal union database of all the films in the world. It's just not possible because of the separate institutions that are caretakers of those films.
But on it's education. It's having festivals and places because having a cable company, you know, a Viacom or a Sony, having potentially not the same kind of interest in the content, and how the importance of preserving the history. You have 100 years that is not important if all they're worried about is what's being released in the theaters now. And so it's to kind of explain what's out there, and like wow, the Warner Library consists of Hanna-Barbera, RKO, MGM. It's just to get people excited. And part of that is having it available, right? If there's more festivals like this, that it's only increasing the fan base, and so we need that next generation of that are excited to be aficionados and watch TCM, and there needs to be a distribution mechanism, and all you can do is fight for it, I think.
There are resources available. I can't speak for the studios, but the archive world, there's a Federation of International Film Archives, there's the Association of Moving Image Archives, all of which provide resources in finding, you're making it easier for people to find where things might be if they're looking for them. So they're out there. You just have to do a little research. But I can't, like, the studios are sadly not included in that. But the archival world, like MoMA is one of the co-founders of the Federation of International Film Archives, and of which consists of the British Film Institute, the Dutch Kinematheek, and who am I forgetting, Dave? No, the co-founders of VIAF.
Well, the Germans.
The Dutch Kinematheek, BFI, MoMA, Cinematheek Française. Yeah. But anyway, there's resources.
Thanks. Thank you. This is so interesting. I really appreciate it. I just have a comment and then a question. Every New Year's Day, the highlight for me is when they show the Twilight Zone marathon, and about 10 years ago, they started showing these, I don't know if it's Blu-ray or this soap opera version that you had mentioned, totally different. Like, it looks 3D, and it doesn't do it. I preferred the older versions. So that's just sort of my comment. I don't know if that's the kind of restoration that you do, or if it's the Blu-ray, whatever, but I don't like that. So my comment, though, is, my question would be, for someone like myself who hasn't seen Giant or The Wizard of Oz in at least 20 years, is the to your knowledge, is the preservation, or is it that magnificently different that it's worth seeing these movies like again, and it's almost like a different experience? Oh, okay. I was just curious about what about each movie would be, is that dramatically different? Thank you.
No, you're seeing it in a venue in which it was intended, which is a theater. To speak, that's like what Seth does. You don't want to go too far. You don't want to be non-authentic to what the film wants to be, what it originally wanted to be. So you don't want to make it better. You just want to make it the way it could be. Again, on Giant will be introed by George Stevens Jr. And wherever possible, if you know the changes made by the director are blessed, right? That's different than me saying, you know, I never really liked that line of dialogue, I'm taking it out, right? That's a sin, right? And so that's when the people are operating the tools, you have to acknowledge, like Seth said, when HD came into being en masse, there were automated tools that were corrupting the image, and it's because it was a new shiny gadget. And it's like, no, this should look like 1931. And to know that not every movie looks the same. What did the director intend? And like in my role now, that's not important. We save Giant, we save Wizard of Oz. We don't remove the scratches. We don't, you know, trying to be as one-to-one as possible. 2-inch video on like Alice, Welcome Back Kotter, you know, Chico and the Man. You make 1-to-1, but you don't use compression, because compression will artifact, and those compression tools will always get better. So you just want to do as little harm, do no harm, if at all possible, and then just capture that format so someone can use it later, and hopefully they don't go overboard on the restoration.
Yes. Could you say something about the sound preservation for films?
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier when Bruce was talking about Vitaphone and the quality of the disc versus the optical material that was available, which made it better. Yeah, sound often gets everybody's wants to. It's all about what you see and not what you hear. We try to go back and use as original sound as possible, and there's great tools or places you can go where they can work miracles with sound, and the quality of sound materials. And it used to be where you were preserving films, you separately preserve the sound, and then you marry it back together again when you're doing a restoration. So I don't know, what else would you like to know about the sound?
I don't know enough to know.
Go ahead, Bruce.
You've spoken so
Yeah.
much about
Yeah, right. Yeah, the sound. Well, just as to go back to Night of the Living Dead, that the sound was the reason that filmmaker wanted to restore the film. He had more sound issues with that film than visual, and that's what made him want to be involved in the restoration.
So are there companies or facilities that specialize in
Yes.
sound restoration?
Yes, we send our sound materials separately from the picture. When we work with Cineric, we'll send the picture elements to Cineric, and they scan it, and then we send the sound elements to this other place in Burbank, California, and they digitize the sound, they work the sound, and they fix it, and then they give it back to Cineric,
And we'll marry it together for
they put it together to the
DCP.
picture.
But on the audio, how was it intended to originally play? Because systems come and go. There was a density track system where if the original film lab printed it too dark, it would impact the quality of the sound. It wasn't intended. There were push-pull tracks, which were kind of the yin and yang, where it would be intended to be summed as a noise-canceling system. So if you only read one half of that, you're not reading it the way it was supposed to. And we're having to reinvent the wheel because the people that knew what this was supposed to sound like are going away. And so it's very important on the Vitaphone disc in particular to preserve it, capture both sides of the groove. There's things that you can do depending on what that sound exists as, and then because the process is to not create artifacts that weren't there originally, but are there because you're not playing them right. And so that is an important function. But to this day, audio is still ignored. It's like, oh, we spent $300 million on this movie. Now you have 3 days to mix it, right? So.
Can I make that comment? I've found that audiences are much more sensitive to bad sound than to bad picture. If you have a bad track, people come out and complain. But we've shown really bad, doopy prints, and they don't care. They do care if it's splicey and everything, but really, they're really sensitive to bad sound, warbly soundtracks and that kind of thing. So it's not something people ignore.
Yeah, I have one question technically. Because restoration is start mostly with the black and white, yeah, from beginning. Yeah, I want to know what's the different work to black and white and color.
Right.
What's the different and difficult or not difficult or same or this? I want you a little bit explain it, please.
Yeah. Often with color, the blue channel is faded, and we have to, restore that to the level of the red and the green. Or if we're working from separations, each strip can have its own flicker, and then so even when you iron them out, you can see the color can drift from the beginning of the shot to the end of the shot, and that's really hard to nail down because I want to at least get it consistent before it's passed off to the colorist, so they don't have to start putting keyframes so that it's drifting a little green towards the end. And a lot of that stuff is just a lot simpler in black and white. It's just much more straightforward.
Can't wait to see the giant.
Yeah. On the giant, that was the separations that Seth is talking about.
Color breathing.
They're black and white records that represent the different emulsion layers of a color film. So at least if it's in black and white, it's not as susceptible to the color fading. And we on the early 50s especially, huge issue with color fading. So we'll scan the original negative. We'll scan they call them red, green, blue separations, but they're really the yellow, cyan, and magenta layers. And that's to allow the restoration person to say, you know what, I'm going to use the blue channel here, and they'll restore that layer because the yellow layer is usually what goes first. And so you can reassemble by selection of what is the image telling you it needed to be, because you want it to get to where it was originally. And so with that opportunity, what we do is, in dating the film stocks, is I want to know, is that black and white separation from 1953, or was it made in 1998 and the fading had already happened? And so it's
The problem for me in the color, was it from close-up cut to long shot, or was it, not match exactly? And I'm so worried about it. How can do it better in future?
There is one question there.
Thank you for coming and for all the work you do. So I have two questions. I realize the first one is not very focused as I was waiting here, so there might not be a good answer for it. But what are the considerations for films that are sort of either unconventional in their materials or in their exhibition? I was thinking about like Nathaniel Dorsky and how he's, I guess, resistant, perhaps for good reason, to the digitization of his films. So what are the ongoing conversations about preserving those? And then Also for Craig, I know that George Feltenstein has said that next year is going to be a big one for Warner Archive. And he teased that there were a couple silent films coming out, I think maybe from the MGM catalog. So I was wondering if you could hint at anything there for
I'll
the,
take
for the crowd here.
Yeah.
I'll take the Dorsky question because we went through that with him at MoMA. We, for our exhibition that was part of the reopening in 2019, we had an exhibition called Private Lives, Public Spaces, Amateur Film and Home Movies and Artist Film. And the first thing you saw before you went into the exhibition was a Nathaniel Dorsky film that he made that had, he made it on 16 millimeter and had 4 different quadrants within the frame. And this was the first film he agreed to be ever digitized of his work, and he was very happy with it. But it was a process of convincing him and going through the whole process with him, versions, and him looking at them. And this is, this is prior to the pandemic. So but he was in San Francisco, we were in New York. We would send him files for him to approve, which was difficult because he's looking on a different monitor that has different color calibration. And then we're tweaking on our end and resending. But when he finally came, and he really, so he's slowly, him personally is but in terms of other material, do you mean like? Orphan Film Foundation? Oh yeah, there's the Orphan Film Symposium. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, for films that are more difficult in content as well.
Well, I know that in the documentary yesterday, like they talked a little bit about brackage with like paint on the actual film and things. But I guess I was also thinking about just, I'm sure there are plenty of filmmakers that I'm not familiar with along the lines of Dorsky, where it's just there's other issues on the way to like sort of digitization or the more, I guess, current conventional preservation models.
Yeah, another example is Ernie Gear, who we've worked on his entire filmography, avant-garde filmmaker, and he always just did everything analog, and then we've gone through this whole process with him where because he worked a lot on 16 millimeter, and then we were like, hey, would you ever want to blow it up to 35 to make it more accessible on film? And that was like going through a whole process, and then he liked that, and then we started like, what if we do a digital intermediate? We scanned it, and then he was like, okay, I like that now. Like, so it was like baby steps with him along the way. So it's really case by case.
And I think on the practicalities, there's a 65 millimeter film. It's only manufactured, I think, 1 batch a year. So if there's several filmmakers that are keeping that alive, but we have to support that, I think, because I loved projecting 70 millimeter film. It's so like macho. You lift up this big heavy reel and put it on the projector. It has a different a different meaning, and it's you can promote it and market it. In Portland, Oregon, there's a old vaudeville theater that's been restored that can actually project 70 millimeter, and so the more we encourage that distribution, maybe it can breathe new life into it. Just like I love silent movies. So, and I can't speak directly to what George was the actual titles, but it's like just a huge wish list because it's so important. The silent movies were so artistic, and you would have triple dissolves, and you would have this. As soon as sound came in, you got a box. No one moved. The camera just sat there, and just the pursuit, like with MGM, silent movies weren't always just black and white. You would have hand-painted, hand-shrinkle scenes. You had 2-color sequences. You had, and And I would love nothing better than to pursue that era. And I hope that the collectors, does someone have the Broadway Melody 2-color Technicolor musical number? There's a dozen Warner features that were completely released in 2-color Technicolor, and they're available in black and white only. And so pursuing that is just never giving up, hoping someone opens up a can and yes, it's there.
I want to hear the answer to his second question about what's coming up for Warner Brothers and what are we going to get to see?
Well, I think I would get in trouble. I was told, they want to exploit and market that would be someone else's limelight. But I can say that the work that we've done, was months and a year ago to prepare for this, and it's about not presuming, because film has a lineage, and a lot of times people say, oh, the original negative is the best, then it's a fine grain, then it's a dupe, and as is the case with, Casablanca is a famous example, the best primary element is the fine grain that's sitting at MoMA. When it was redone, the latest version is we didn't take anything for granted. It's like there was a UCLA second generation nitrate print, which we preserve that reel for a particular reason on that for a shot, and Library of Congress had a nitrate dupe, and that was used for I think all of 2 shots. But it's just going through, and it's not predetermining what you're going to use, but letting the having that. From my point, all of that's protected, and then someone goes in and says, I'm going to use this shot from this element. And that's pretty much what Seth does, right?
Yeah, and the record keeping is, impressive at the studios. We were working on a CinemaScope job, original negative, so we had to correct the fading. That was fine, but 12,000 frames of 4A were from this dupe that, as one of my colleagues always says, is soft as a grape, and it just did not sit in with the rest of the picture. And we knew there had to be something better. We had the separations, we scanned them, but they were too far gone. They had warped so much independently of each other that when we tried to recombine them, even with tools that specifically can de-warp each channel to each other to match, it was too much. But we had this HD reference where that section of the film was better. And we just kept going back, referencing the numbers. And finally we found an IP from, I think, 1982, made from the separations before all that warping had set in. So finally, and everything else was almost done, but we were just like, we can't leave this one alone. So they finally, numbers, elements, shipped it to us, and now it's finally incorporated into the job, and we're feeling better about it. But yeah, so that's the hunt is a big part of it.
To what Craig was saying before on the sublime art of silent, I highly recommend you come to see Rosita today, because it's a beautiful restoration that MoMA did, and it's really it's also a beautiful film. So don't miss that. And I'm gonna suggest, unless there are any questions, there is one there, but we can also the last one, and then we can take it upstairs, because everybody's invited to a brunch. So you can continue the conversation more informally. But what to Matt?
Well, I just wanted to thank all of you for preserving these movies and making them accessible to us. There have been so many old films that I've seen that I wasn't moved by, and that I later, when I saw a better print, was, because they were just lost, they're muddy, they're distant. And so I really appreciate everything that you do.
If you live in New York and can come in January, Dave Kerr programs a festival called To Save and Project, and you can see a lot more restore movies. Not to promote, but that's another opportunity to see more.
Great. And I also wanted to thank you for answering a question I've had for a while when I've been watching something in digital projection, which seemed to me to be at a higher, it seemed that there were more frames than 24. It seemed that there was like a higher refresh, and you know, these lower frame rates, the 24s and the 18s, they're really closer to our own natural persistence of vision and our alpha states and all that kind of stuff. And when you say, well, that's just what it is, that's the technology we have to deal with, why? We've innovated so far. Can't the computer just draw the image in the dark while we're all sitting in the dark and then present it to us as a single image? And wouldn't it be you that would have the access and the influence with the people at Sony and all these other companies that you could actually influence that hardware change?
And that's the best thing we can be, is the sand that creates the pearl, right? It's like it doesn't exist. Why? Why don't that technology that we can scan on the lot of that 3532 element that didn't exist? That didn't happen. It was we can't do this now, and then you take two disparate things. It wasn't intended to do that work, but you can do it. And it's the challenge of like, hey, how do you read this optical track properly? And that's why there are technical Oscars won all the time. And it's not something you can put a time frame on. You just say, here you go. This you know, either you find an old setup that you can rebuild and play it the way it was, or you invent something new. And I'm not an engineer, but you just challenge people. You say, I need to listen to this. And then you go and listen and reject dozens of times. Like, no, that doesn't sound right. And then, you know, but that's the pursuit. The pursuit is always get better. Project a silent movie the way it was intended to be projected.
That's like the $1 million question. Why can't they make it look a little more like film being projected? I mean, we have to send out 2 versions of films at different frame rates because of people's, or you know, certain equipment's inability to project them, or the digital projector. So I don't know enough about that to understand, but it's a good question. I don't know why they can't find it. I wish there was for film projectors, there's a rheostat. If it's the projector's motor can go up and down to very specific, you know, can go down to 12 frames per second, or all the way up, you know, standard speed 24, and it's just a dial. Why can't they have a digital dial on the projector?
Okay, well, I want to thank you. Let's go upstairs and brunch. Thank you for coming. Join us upstairs, and thank you to our panelists. It's very fun.
Yes, yes.